Great, thanks, Mark. So my name is Chen. I'm obviously not Alex Tucker, so if you were here to see Alex, we swapped places, so he'll be on at noon, because we were both talking about Angular, and I know Notions, they just switched over to Angular also. And I saw Angular, and it just became my favorite MVC framework, so I just wanted to sort of share, thank you, the awesomeness that is Angular. So a little bit about myself. I'm a pretty random person, so you can more or less say that I'm a front-end developer, but I'm actually, also a hardware hacker. I used to, I might have called myself an artist a few years ago, doing interactive art installations. But in the past few years, I've actually kind of spent 40% of my time actually teaching. So I'm a ladies learning code instructor. So there's actually a JavaScript workshop coming up next weekend. So if you know any females who are looking to learn JavaScript, please recommend that they attend. I also teach Arduino or Android workshops, and I also teach kids Scratch programming, so I'm pretty all over the place. And my obligatory plug is that I'm working at TELUS right now through Nascent Digital, and if you are someone who does responsive websites, I'm hiring, so please come up to me afterwards. So I want to talk about Angular.js. Their sort of tagline is that it's the super heroic JavaScript MVW framework. So if you are a beginner to immediate, Angular is amazing because if you have sort of like spaghetti code, Angular is going to help save you from that. And if you're a bit more advanced, you can start thinking about Angular in terms of it helps you write more complex web applications in a much simpler way. And then you can also think about writing code with unit testing in mind. So it fits very well for if you're just a beginner all the way up to being a more advanced JavaScript developer. Because I'm sort of aiming this at beginners, I just want to do an MVC sort of refresher. Who here actually uses MVC during their day job? Okay, so pretty good. And it's great because JavaScript really has matured over the last bit where I'm actually traditionally a Flash developer, and I definitely used MVC in Flash, but when it came to figuring out how to do it in JavaScript, I was just very confused for quite a long time. I didn't really know where to start. But the basic idea with MVC is that you have a model, which is all your application data. So that might be your values that you're typed into a form field. And then your view is sort of what the user sees on the web page. But the idea is that your model and your view never talk to each other. They only talk to each other through the controller, which mediates this conversation. And the MVC way in Angular, it's much tighter. I find that it feels like you're flowing between the model, the whatever is what they kind of like to call it, and the view very efficiently. And so it's very easy to sort of be able to update values in your model and see it in your view right away with something called data binding. Was anyone here actually a Flex developer? I know you guys don't like Flash here, but data binding was definitely like something that I used to do in Flex development. So when I saw Angular, I was like, yes, this actually feels like I'm right at home. And who here uses Backbone? Yeah, okay, so it's trickling of people. So definitely Backbone is one of the most popular MVC frameworks, probably due to its sort of early traction in the beginning of when web applications were maturing. So Backbone, much like Angular, it gives you a way to organize your code, but it's more through APIs after you extend Backbone classes. And it's very unopinionated, so essentially you can use it as little or as much as you want to. And so I sort of looked at Backbone and thought, people definitely recommended it to me, but I sort of looked at it and said, there's just a lot of work involved. And so I like this little quote from a blog post where it said, if the framework doesn't write the code, you have to, and seriously, we're lazy, so why would I want to? So then I thought, okay, Angular. Angular's actually I sort of think of Angular very Zen-like, where, it is an MVC framework, but there's really nothing to inherit. You don't call any APIs, and you don't have to worry about a complex life cycle for, your controllers updating your models and all these other things. You just I feel like you just write HTML and JavaScript, and it just feels really natural. So it's very zen. So I really like working in Angular. And one thing I really like about Angular is because I was a Flash developer for such a long time, it was really hard for me to figure out how do I translate all these ideas I have about building large applications into JavaScript. And so I really like that Angular actually is very opinionated. There's sort of a right way to do most things. So when you're trying to figure out how to do something, there isn't like someone telling you, well, you can do it this way, or you can do it that way, or here's this third way. It's very much like you have like one way you should do it, and that's the most efficient way. It gives you a way to organize your code, but like I said earlier, it feels very Zen-like. So it feels like you're just writing HTML and JavaScript. You're not really extending classes in order to use its APIs. And it does a lot of heavy lifting for you. So a lot of the DOM manipulation that you typically do, it sort of goes away using data binding. And I would totally recommend reading Appliness, issue number 11. It just came out, so it's very timely. I'm reading an article with the creator, and also there's another article with Brian Ford talking about how to build large applications. So definitely download this PDF or put it onto your tablet and give it a read. And I think a great quote that I saw was that, the creator sort of doesn't really think about Angular as just like another way to organize your code. Really, it's like, if you had to, leave all the baggage behind of what we've learned about HTML and how to build for the web, like how would you redesign a web browser knowing that we want to build web applications and not just web pages? So the creator of Angular just sort of thinks, if the web browser could be reinvented, it would be Angular. And so, who remembers writing like get document by ID? Like, we rarely do that anymore. We definitely love the idea that jQuery came along and it really simplified DOM manipulation because you started using selectors. So the old school way, you would get an element with an ID, and then you would update the text using a .inner HTML or a .text context. And it got simpler with jQuery. You just have a selector, so it simplified that extra line. But if Angular, everything's sort of inline, so you use these two curly braces, and essentially that's, as long as your model has this variable, your view is going to update automatically. You don't even have to look up what that div is. You can notice that the div doesn't even have an ID. You don't even need to worry about adding, messing up your markup with ID classes just so you can talk to it through JavaScript. So it's very clean. So a really simple Angular application looks like this, where you make sure to include the Angular application code. You can do that before your closing body tag. But what you want to do is, in your HTML tag, the top one, you just want to bootstrap your application and say, this is going to be an Angular application by writing ng-app. And ng is sort of the prefix for Angular, so ng sort of sounds like Angular vaguely, but I don't think so. But ng, just remember that's Angular. So anything that's specific to Angular usually starts with an ng prefix. And so you bootstrap your application using ng-app, and then anytime you want to save data back to your model, you just type ng-model and the variable that's going to be in your model. And then whenever you want to get data from your model, you use the curly braces, two curly braces, and that sort of dynamically reads data from your model and updates it right onto your web page. And I'll show you just a slightly more complex one might be, you might actually explicitly have a controller, another separate JavaScript file. So I'm just going to show you this example in just a moment, but I'm going to do the same things where I bootstrap my application using ng-app. This time I'm going to do it on the body tag, not the HTML tag. You can put it essentially anywhere that's appropriate, as long as anything else you're doing that's Angular has to be inside those tags. That's just an important thing to remember. But otherwise, it's the same idea. And then I can explicitly say, I'm going to have an external JavaScript file that's going to be my controller. And I'm going to call it a magical controller because I think Angular is pretty magical. And I wish I could use my mouse cursor, but I can't. But you can use ng-click to sort of call functions that are in your controller, or even you can use data binding to update your classes. So you actually don't need to go and use a jQuery selector in order to change the class of anything. You can actually just use that with data binding. So I'm going to show you what this actually looks like. Not that. That's kind of boring. Okay, so this is more or less the same, except for I've added a little bit of extra CSS in here. But this is the same code that I just showed you in that previous slide. So I have ngClick, and I know that I want to call a method in my controller called glow, and there's another one called fade. And this one uses data binding in order to update the class. And highlight is right here, so it's going to change the background color to white. And here's some curly braces here for the data binding. So then in my JavaScript file, my controller, it's fairly simple. You can see that I'm actually not extending anything here. It just looks like JavaScript. Like, it's a very, very simple file. Scope is sort of like this. So it's the scope of your controller. So you always have to make sure that any sort of variables start with $scope, where in your HTML, you're gonna notice that the scope is sort of like what's in your container here. So ta-da, glow and fade are also in here, but you just have to make sure that it uses scope.tada if you're gonna call it back in your view. So what this means so here's a simple example here where, I'd use data binding in order to get this text to update. I'll show you here, so ta-da, there's my string there. I'm just using data binding here. So I can actually just go ahead and update this. I'm just going to refresh so you can see that I didn't have to do any sort of DOM manipulation in order for that to happen. And then also, I can call methods, so I can actually use these methods to change the CSS classes. I can either, add or remove the highlight class. And I'm actually not using DOM manipulation for this. I'm actually just using Booleans in order to set if it's true or false. But then in my markup, I can actually use one curly brace, say that, if highlight equals true, add a class of highlight. If it's false, remove it. So I'm not doing any DOM manipulation here, so it feels very clean and very pure that I can just, sort of put these additional Angular tags into my HTML, and it just updates automatically. So I think that's pretty magical. And so I'm going to actually show you a little bit about this in practice and with an application that I'm working on right now. Because I do a lot of teaching, I sort of came up with this idea is that I wish there was a GitHub for educators where, if I'm making this presentation, I could actually make it in HTML, and someone could come along and say, I also want to do this presentation, so I'm going to fork it and make it sound a bit like my own. So I sort of conceived of this idea called Code Huddle, and I'm building it open source. So if you're interested in sort of helping, it's up on GitHub, and just let me know if you want to help out on it. But essentially, I just kind of call it GitHub for educators. Oops. So I'm just going to run that for you. It's still a work in progress. I wanted to get it done way earlier, but my day job is kind of kicking my ass right now. So the idea is that, someone can come along, they say that they want to make a presentation, so they can go ahead and create a huddle. Sorry, I can't type. It's actually kind of freezing up here. So So I made a huddle. It was what I call kind of like a slide deck, or it could be converted into a blog post. But the idea is that you write everything in Markdown, so you actually don't have to do any HTML at all. You just make your presentations in Markdown. And so you just like have sort of a collection of Markdown files, and it's going to go and sort of generate that on the fly and make you an awesome looking slide deck. And it even has like interactive code sandboxes in here. So right now the backend is Node, but I'm obviously not going to talk about that too much. But I'm building all this front end in Angular, and so some of the cool things that Angular does is, when I went and sort of did even simple stuff like this, having this little info bubble come up. It was all through Angular using some of their directives, so I didn't have to do any sort of DOM manipulation at all. Like it felt very clean for me to do that. But then Angular also has these cool things like filters, where if I wanted to match filter through my list of huddles using just a string, I actually don't need to write very much code in order to do that. So I can just start typing, and all of this comes out of the box with Angular. Like I didn't even have to write any of that. I just had to sort of bootstrap my text input and my view output, and just say that I wanted to use a filter. And so I'll actually kind of show you that it's my browse page here. And so I can actually use these things called, they're pipes, but they'll sort of say to Angular, use a filter. So I actually have quite a few filters, 2 of them, running on that particular list of huddles right here. Either from the title, based on filtering by technology, or by newest or top ranked. But in my code, in my HTML, it's quite simple. But I get to abstract a lot of this filtering when I need to do something special, and I can actually make something called filters in order to sort of encapsulate all that sort of algorithms, and I can actually then reuse it or perhaps share it so other people can also use the same filters that I'm using. So let me see if I can just pull that up. So here I might have a filter that matches the huddle based on their what kind of technology tags are tagged onto the huddle. So you can see that it's fairly simple, but it's nice because I get to encapsulate all of that sort of information into this one file. And I don't have to ruin the rest of my code with a bunch of extra stuff, so my code stays very clean. I get rid of all this spaghetti code. I can just kind of put it into this one file and know that whenever I want to use this on any sort of input field, I just use that pipe and say that I'm going to use this filter. So it was a quick demo, but I'm sure you're probably thinking, I want to go make an Angular app today. So I think the best way to make an Angular app is using Yeoman. There's already some built-in scaffolds in it, and so I'm actually going to be using version 0.9.6. I use it at work, so I haven't had time to upgrade to version 1.0. But an AngularJS generator is already included into your app, into a Yeoman download or a Yeoman install. So you just kind of have to figure out, if you actually want to make your own generator or edit the one that's built in, you just have to kind of dig into your generators directory that's sort of hidden a few levels deep into the system. But you can actually, make your own generators if you want to, if you need to customize this for your particular application. And you can also, whenever there's updates, you just have to run a Node package manager update, and you're going to get the latest version of the generator. So if you're interested, you should follow Brian Ford on Google+, because he's the maintainer of the project. So definitely look him up on Google+. But the idea is that you start with an empty folder. So if I'm here, it's empty, there's nothing else in here. So I'm just going to go, actually let me make this bigger. I'm just gonna go Yeoman and Knit Angler. And I don't know, who's an Angler fan here? Nice, okay. We have Addie in the front row too. You can bug him about it. Okay, so I'm gonna say that I wanna use Twitter